everybody. Thank you very much for that introduction, Johnny. It's, I can't tell you how much of a privilege it is to be here. You are a premier, the premier establishment, certainly in the UK and amongst the world, for this, for war studies, history of war, etc. And I feel quite nervous about talking in front of you. There are some super brains here, and I just hope that you're going to be gentle with me when it comes to questions. But I do hope you've got some good questions for me. Please keep thinking. It's very nice for me to know what you are considering, what I've stimulated in your minds. One question that potentially is the link between piracy and terrorism, which certainly we, the military, haven't worked out, and but which is one that possibly is for you to be thinking of. And it's great to have so many people here from so many different countries. Already I've discovered some Americans, Swede, somebody from New Zealand who are going to thrash in the rugby, by the way, in a week's time, once they've overcome the French. But also from different departments. My daughter Poppy is here with some friends from the music department, which puts me under extreme pressure, because I know I'll be reported on when she gets home. I'm not going to go through anything that is sort of deeply strategic or which will change the world in terms of what the navies are doing. What I want to do is give a very personal account of how the navies tackled piracy in the Somali basin. What I'm going to do is I'll show a short bit of film first. There's another bit of film to come, which is always very, very good, because if you find yourself falling asleep after the first few slides, you know that there's something else exciting to look forward to in about 10 minutes' time. I served as Chief of Staff to NATO's counter-piracy squadron. As I go through it, you'll realise that it's not just NATO that's there, it is the European Union naval force, it is the coalition maritime force, which is led mostly by the Americans, but which encompasses all sorts of other people. There are some independent deployers there. There's all sorts of other, strange things going on at the strategic level. But us at the tactical level, had an awful lot to do, had our work cut out in keeping the pirates at bay. So I'll start with a bit of film. I was embarked in the flagship, which is that one there, leading this team of 5 ships. We were the flag staff in the flagship, a staff of about 20 people amongst a crew of some 200. And what you'll see initially is, in the first clip of film, is about a minute of kind of the preparation for counter-piracy, which happened on an annual, or sort of a biannual exercise called Joint Warrior in the north of Scotland. The biggest enemy there is the weather. In fact, the weather was all right while we were doing this. But then you'll see the transition into moving into the Somali basin, and some very interesting clips of how we tackled, or what our approach was to tackling piracy, what the Navy's response was, if you like, to piracy. So hopefully, let's get the film going. I didn't choose the music, by the way. I don't even know what the music is. You might be able to tell me. That's it. Can I just ask, has anybody visited the Somali basin before? Where were you when you were there?
I was on Fort Pitt, PT last year.
Ah, right. Doing CTG 508, perhaps, part of the NATO force?
No, with 451 and then you guys with that. So.
Yeah, off the beaches. Fascinating. She's back there now.
No,
there's 508.03 for NATO. This is what I'm going to talk about. I'm glad you've said that. You can perhaps back me up on some of the things I say, or even correct me. I'm just going to run through what the problem is. The problem starts with geography. It's a vast area of ocean. What sort of targets that we have, the kind of the shipping that pirates love to nab because it's easy, and then what our response was, the military forces, NATO, the EU land force, and the coalition forces. Starting with the geography, if I was clever, I'd be able to implant over there a map of the whole of mainland Europe, because that's what you've got in the middle of that bit of ocean. You have here the Gulf of Aden, where most of the naval forces are. That's where the merchant ships want us. But here, all that's left is about 5 or so warships that are left. And at any one time there could be a maximum of 2 or 3 because of transiting, maintenance, etc. And so if you equate that, if you think of each of those warships as being a police car, 3 police cars, the whole of Europe. So an attack happens down here in Madrid. Your closest police car is here in Oslo, and it has to get down from there to there with a maximum speed of 25 miles an hour. So that's the scope of the problem. And then if I show you here the extent of the number of attacks, you can see that the pirates used every extreme of the Somali basin to do their attacks. The red ones are the successful ones, unfortunately, that occurred in the first 4 or 5 months, the first 4 months this year. We managed to cut it out. We managed to finish it all off from the end of April, which I'll explain, and I'll explain how I think, or the factors that went towards that. But when you read about in the paper about the Navy's just not doing enough, hopefully you'll understand what the incredible limitations are that we have. Just a couple of ships patrolling an area the size of mainland Europe. Right, and who are the bad guys? Well, that's a bad guy there. I don't know his name, but he looks pretty similar to everybody else. He's slim, he's very fit, he doesn't require much food. Every afternoon he chews on something called cat, which is something that gives you a bit of a high, then a bit of a low, but generally takes away your appetite. It also gives you a good stimulus before you try and jump on board a merchant ship. He's got a great endurance, this chap. He can travel in one of those, or one of those probably for about a month or so with just enough food or fuel that you see there. And then he can jump into one of those things there, speed up to about 30 knots, and then jump on board a merchant ship if it's not being protected. It's a brilliant business model. It doesn't require much investment. It requires a ladder, a couple of outboard motors, a bit of fuel, and about half a dozen of these guys here. The returns are immense. Something like $10 to $12 million now are the ransoms being paid at the top end. The average is about $6 million. And if you think that if he was a fisherman or just a normal Somali going about Somali's business, he would be earning about $600 a year. But if he's the first bloke up the ladder, pirating that ship, he's probably going to get about $10,000. So you can see what the attraction is. The coastline here is vast, about 1,300 miles, and it equates to something like the whole of the eastern seaboard of the US. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's very, very big. For those of you who are investing in the hotel business, it's just one great big long sandy beach. It's just such a shame that it's unpoliced and therefore badlands, wild country. What do they use? I've shown you a couple of the boats that they use. This is a Yemeni type skiff. You can see that it's got these powerful engines at the back. For those of you who have any boats, you'll see that it's always Yamahas. And Yamahas are the best engines in the world. So they've got a lot of taste. I think they're refurbished in the Yemen and then smuggled across the Gulf of Aden and then distributed in what is becoming a very clever logistics system within the country of Somalia. Vast country, but they managed to smuggle these things around and supply the bad guys. Moving up a scale, you saw earlier a picture of a whaler, it's what we call a whaler, packed with fuel. There's a bit of food in there, a bit of that cat weed that they chew on, and not much else. Now those, say, they can go out for about a month. They can go out probably to about 200 miles off the coast. But they can also be captured. This is a Greek ship, Lumos. But the pirates decided, probably towards the end of last year, that they weren't getting far enough. So they started to hijack dhows. This is, excuse me, that's a dhow. That's a gel type dhow. It's normally used for fishing, but it can transport goats, cattle, camels, fuel, anything. But it's got a fantastic range. It's got a crew of about 16, usually Indian, Pakistani, Yemeni, generally those guys who just want to carry on their normal, lawful business, but they get nabbed. They get jumped on board by pirates who just overcome them very quickly. The crew then have to feed the pirates and drive them around to wherever they want to go. And that's what we saw a lot of, which is why they were able to get so far in the Somali Basin for the first part of this year. That was their changing tactic, which had us completely foxed for the first couple of months. And they can hide. It's a vast area of ocean. They can just hide in a shipping lane. And if I explain to you that there are 23,000 ships that pass through the Gulf of Aden and then go into the Somali Basin, you can see it's a huge problem. How do you protect all those ships? Well, you don't. There's a lot of self-protection that's required. And that's before I even mentioned the number of ships that are going up the Indian coast, that are going from the Gulf of Oman down to Madagascar, to the Mozambique Channel, all of that lot that don't pass through. I mean, there are thousands, probably up to 50,000 shipping movements a year in the Somali Basin, and it's easy to pick them off. They're even using big merchant ships now as motherships. So you see this one is the Poland, which was hijacked in November last year, and you can see it's got those pirate skiffs there on the upper deck, which are very easy with this crane to drop over the side. And of course, it looks like a legitimate merchant ship, stick it in the middle of a shipping lane, and who's going to suspect that it's going to do anything wrong? So you can see again the kind of miles that they do. Paradira here is one of the main pirate bases. There's Frisbee, there's El Danan, there's Ras Shafun up there. All kind of pirate logistics hubs, which are great for supplying and doing the business. Okay, and that's the result. Piracy costing, I think, between $7 billion and $12 billion per year. It's a lot of money. Relatively, it's probably not a huge amount of money. But if you think that the main oil routes are at risk, and let me give you an example. Shell shipping. Shell runs 170 tankers, not all their own, about 70 of their own, 100 chartered, and they do not deliver to West Africa anymore. To East Africa. They don't go into Mombasa, into Tanzania, and all the way to South Africa. They just avoid it. Now, Shell is a big player in the world trade of oil, so you can imagine the impact that's having, strategic impact on the development of East Africa and the African continent. But the worst thing, and for me as a professional mariner, is to see that number of ships, and that was at the peak in February this year, with nearly 700 seafarers, mostly Filipino, Indonesian and Indian, all captured, all being kept in not very pleasant conditions on the ships that have been hijacked. In some ways not being treated badly by the pirates, in some ways being treated very badly by the pirates. And that to me, and that I'm glad to say to the decent shipping companies, is the major concern. Because the problem there is that ships don't go without crew, and crew do not want to sail in ships that are going through pirate waters. That's the big impact on the shipping companies. Right, so we've seen the bad guys, we've seen the impact of the bad guys. We'll talk about the good guys now. So this is our squadron, led, as I say, by the Dutch, because it's a NATO squadron. In this case, it's rotational. The Brits were leading up until June last year, and the Dutch took over. The Dutch handed over to the Turks, and so on and so on and so on. But in there, the staff of 20 from 7 nations: Bulgarian, Belgian, Brits, Italian, Greek, Turk. And it was my job to kind of bring all that lot together, which was interesting. I had my favourite was my Bulgarian, who was my chief planner, and his approach to planning was fairly straightforward. He said, "Sir, why will not just kill all the pirates?" I said, "Well, George, it's there's a problem with rules of engagement. You have to think about rules of engagement. They are shit." So there was a touch of overcoming, certain cultural differences. But also amongst the ships themselves, we have the Danes, fantastic, true Viking spirit, a small navy, a country of 5 million people, but utterly sensational, completely fearless, just could not wait to get in and just the pirate problem. The Americans, we had two Americans, Bainbridge and Halliburton, and then the Groves, who were wonderful. An Australian friend of mine, as he would describe, would say, and I make the random and frequent use of nuclear weapons. Well, of course, it wasn't, sorry, that was a bad Australian accent, in New Zealand, but they made random and frequent use of the Vulcan phalanx weapon, which you saw there, which, as I've explained to our American friends here, did not go down too well with the Americans. But from our point of view, it was a fantastic thing to do, because it blew pirate skiffs out of the water, and in one case blew a pirate mothership right out of the water. Several pirates killed, several captured, it cut out one of the most dangerous pirate action groups that we had. And the Turk, a few more, should we say, political restrictions on what she could do, but nonetheless, a great player with the team. But there were others, and if we look here, you can see this is a snapshot really. We had the 5 ships that I described there, and the coalition force, the American-led one, HMS Cornwall there, an old ship of mine actually, but with a Pakistani commodore embarked, because they couldn't provide a flagship, so we, the Brits, provided a flagship for them, and he led quite a small force that was mostly in the Gulf of Aden. Here, the European Union, they got lots and lots of ships, so that's very, very good. But of course there you have differing mandates, if you like. NATO's mandate is to deter, disrupt, destroy. The EU's mandate, which is a little softer, shall we say, in order to encourage more participation. The Germans, for instance, will only participate in the EU, they won't participate in NATO, but they're a NATO nation. But they like the mandate. The mandate is better, and the mandate for the EU primarily is to guard ships of the World Food Programme, which go between Mombasa and Mogadishu, Bosaso, Djibouti and Mogadishu, to provide all the food that's needed for the starving people of Somalia. And you're aware, of course, at the moment of the famine in Somalia, which demands an awful lot more ships to come. So it means that actually this lot here are quite taken up with guarding World Food Programme ships, which is great. It's a humanitarian mission, but it just reduces the amount of ships that are available to do the patrolling and to do the serious business of cutting out pirates. Right. What other challenges do we have? Are you all with me so far? All okay? Do you know much of this already? Thank God. Right, we have here, if you like, this is the strategic map. This is what it looks like, or the start of the strategic map. So you have the coalition force I've mentioned, EU, NATO, all of that, each of their own mandates. The independent powers, so the Russians, the Chinese, the Koreans, one or two others who are doing their escort duty, old-fashioned escort duty in the Gulf Bay. But over the top is industry, because actually we're there to serve industry. And peace and war studies, world trade is one of the greatest bringers of peace, if you like, in our time. It's up to us to protect them. So industry has to have a big influence on what's going on. But impose over the top of that the transitional federal government of in Mogadishu, Somali government, the World Food Programme I mentioned. This is the American organisation in the Horn of Africa, Combined Joint Task Force Horn of Africa, based in Djibouti. The United Nations Political Office for Somalia, so therein, the United Nations Support Office of AMISOM. The United Nations, AMISOM is the African Union force in Mogadishu, fighting away just to keep Shabab down. United Nations Department for Peacekeeping Operations, great place to work, by the way. Private armed security, I haven't mentioned them yet, but that's a real growing force. It's a big industry, and if you are short of a job to do after university, there's plenty of opportunity for private security. AMISOM, I mentioned them, African Union mission in Somalia. The US, again, AFRICOM, and the International Maritime Organization, which is trying to bring together all the sort of the views of its members to have a coordinated line. And at the moment, They're really having a lot of hand-wringing about the legitimacy of private armed security. At the moment, there's 167 private security firms operating in the Somali basin, totally unregulated. You know, from the quite responsible lot to the cowboy outfit that is just monitored from free Wi-Fi in a Costa coffee bar. That's the way it works. You know, so you can pay quite a lot for it, or you can pay not very much to have a few armed guards on your ship as you're transiting this region. So that's it. You know, we've got to try and string all that lot together. We do that in this thing here called the SHADE, the Shared Awareness and Development meeting, which takes place in Bahrain every 12 weeks, where one of NATO, the EU, or the coalition force chairs this big meeting with all this lot taking part. And as you can imagine, there's an awful lot of conflicting priorities to make counter-piracy work. There is an element of coordination. The United Kingdom Maritime Trade Organisation is based in Dubai there, and that does a sort of a check-in procedure on Mercury, which is the main unclassified system of coordination. If a ship is attacked, the first thing it does, it reports it on Mercury to the UK MTO. The Maritime Security Centre for the Horn of Africa, it's based in Northwood with the EU naval force, and it provides these see and avoid warnings. So if a pirate ship is seen, it advises ships to route round it. And then the NATO Shipping Centre there provides daily warnings, updates, intelligence, which is accessible to shipping companies and to the ships themselves. So we're doing our best to coordinate. Right, so far I've talked about the geography, the bad guys, who the good guys are, and what the conflictions are in terms of coordination. What I'm going to do now is talk you through the targets, the sort of ships that pirates love to board. And as you can see, they're slow. And a couple of statistics. A slow ship is one that's doing, we think, less than about 18 knots. 18 knots in real speed is about 21, 22 miles an hour. And you'll find that most pirate skiffs can't quite keep up with that. Low freeboard, can be anything from about a metre to 2 metres, that kind of range. Obviously, a great big oil tanker, probably has about a sort of a 6 or 7 metre freeboard. A car carrier has maybe a 15 metre freeboard. But if I was to tell you that oil tankers and car carriers have also been pirated, it makes it makes the problem difficult. Have you heard of best management practices? You have heard of best management practices. Some of you maybe have. What this is the merchant community that are putting together guidelines for their merchant ships to follow. So, barbed wire around the ship, extra lookouts, turning on your fire hoses, and if necessary, embarking armed guards, but principally having a citadel, a safe room within your ship that if you're attacked by pirates, you can go into, lock yourselves in, bolt the doors, weld everything tightly shut so that the pirates can get in. Because a pirated ship is no good to a pirate if he doesn't have a crew, i.e. hostages, people that are the bargaining ships. And then no protection from security teams. So here we are. Here is your average pirate attack. You can see that he's been filmed here or photographed from the Bremen. It did become a citadel situation, and it was eventually, sadly, Bremen was pirated because the pirates broke into the citadel. But they came alongside, stuck the ladder, and just jumped on board. It was all just too easy. But if we look at the type of ships that were really vulnerable, and we create a vulnerable shipping list that you saw there, it's something called the Mighty Servant. It's a Dutch company. The Dutch, of course, are brilliant at salvage, ship transportation, tugs, etc. This one was going from the Gulf of Oman through the Gulf of Aden and up the Red Sea, and it was going to have a great big oil rig on it. Now, so a very expensive cargo, probably a crew of about between 15 and 20, and it was just going to be as easy as anything to pirate. It was all right because it got special attention. This is a couple of Dutch tugs that were attacked on a Thursday afternoon. We happened to be within 24 hours steaming because it was a Dutch ship and a Dutch crew. We took special attention. And you can see the kind of protection that it had. Razor wire on the side, and this one did have armed guards. And it managed to shoot. This one here is called Irene. What's interesting about this is that it has 300,000 tons of your finest crude oil on board, which equates to 1/5 of the United States daily import quantity of oil. So you can see we're starting to eat into strategic management of fuel. And it was pirated very easily. It took 20 minutes to nab that. It had no protection, it had no safe room there, and it was all too easy. It was the mothership that nabbed it was the Shu Fu #1, a Taiwanese fishing boat that had been grabbed itself and was therefore a pirate mothership. So 300,000 tons, and I think the ransom for that was about $9 million. It wasn't the most expensive one. And then this one here, this is called the Beluga nomination that my ship came very close to having to try to sort out. A nice juicy cargo of luxury yachts that was heading down to the Seychelles, but that was pirated about 500 miles to the north of the Seychelles, which ended up rather nastily. The Seychelles Coast Guard came along and blasted it fairly randomly with machine gun fire, killed one of the crew members, injured a pirate. Another crew member was executed on board, and another one jumped overboard and was never found. So the human consequences are very profound. I mentioned the safe room. This is the citadel. This is where the crew must go and hide. The pirates are getting smart. They know that without the crew they can't do anything, so they try and smoke them out. And of course, if you can imagine 20 or so Filipinos all cramped into a small safe room, it's very scary when the smoke starts coming in, so you probably want to get out. Other pirates are bringing grinding gear, tools that can break through steel doors. They are now getting smarter and smarter. But when a fire gets out of control, that's the kind of damage that can be done. So that's it. So we've now looked at the vulnerable targets. But what's the response? What's the Navy's response? Well, we'll divide it into two areas: the practical and the political. And we do get political now and again. We people in uniform, although perhaps we might not think that goes too well together. But direct action. Let's have a look at what happened here. Now, the NATO squadron, the 5 ships that I described, led by the Dutch flagship, were the Somali Basin Coordinator. And let me just take you through the 2 graphs here. There's what's been going on in the southern Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, so that northern bit of the Somali Basin and the Gulf of Aden. Now, in 2010, you can see what was going on in the Gulf of Aden. A lot of ships being pirated. The red ones are the ships being pirated there. The yellow is the attacks, and those are the ones that were just approaches. But you can see that after the military response was to go in very heavily in the Gulf of Aden, and you can see that nothing much was going on January, February, March. Conversely, in the wider Somali Basin, you had there not many attacks going on in 2010, but by 2011, 5 pirated in January, 6 pirated in February. It was, things were looking bleak. Because we were supposed to be the ones coordinating, sending warships to ships that were being attacked, trying to intervene. But as you can see, 11 ships pirated in the first 2 months of this year. It was not looking good, and we just couldn't think what to do. We were there spread out too far. So we just sat down, and I got Georgie, my Bulgarian planner, and I got my intelligence officer together. We just thought, well, we've got to have a different approach to this. So what we did, we analysed the anchorages, we analysed where we thought the attacks were going to take place, bearing in mind it's a 1,300-mile coast, it's a vast area. Where do we get these people? And so, and it shows you the power of intelligence. Right? We had a good chat about intelligence later. This is an intelligence-led operation. And anybody who's thinking of going into intelligence, please don't underestimate. It's a fantastic tool, which I think did not take enough notice of at the beginning, but eventually we did. We realised that these are the pirated merchant ships, and we thought that here would be a whole bunch of whalers that were going to leave the coast at the end of the monsoon season. Because if I showed you that graph, January and February, we're still in the northeasterly monsoon. It's still, in theory, too bad weather for pirating, but they were still doing it. But we thought at the end of sort of February, middle of March, we're going to get lots of whalers coming out and attacking merchant ships. So we went there and we thought, right, we've got to put pressure on the beaches. So with the few ships that we had two ships, the Danish and the Dutch ship, and we just sat on the coast and waited and waited and waited. Now you'll turn around to me and you say, well, Martin, you're stupid. Why didn't you think of this before? It's so bleeding obvious. But these things aren't obvious when all the other problems are around you, and you don't have enough ships. Where do you put them? Because just going to the coast, it meant that the whole then of the Somali basin was completely free of warships. So it was a bit of a gamble. But I'm pleased to say it did pay off. What we did, we put our two warships here off Grizzly Camp, which we knew it was a known pirate haven, it was a known pirate safe haven, because it was protected by the merchant ships, and we just sat. And actually, what happened was, in your war studies, as I'm sure you will find, some of the most decisive victories have been won through luck. And I must admit, we were very, very lucky. We kept the pressure on, and on the same day, the 2nd of April, one mothership was leaving to go and do some pirating, and another mothership, both dhows, both Gelbert type dhows, was coming in, having done some pirating. So we, the Dutch, nabbed the one that was coming in, the Danes targeted the one that was going out, and almost simultaneously, the same thing happened. We sent boarding parties over, but as we approached, we were fired on. We fired back, because under rules of engagement, once you're fired on, you can fire back with overwhelming force. And in both cases, again, almost simultaneously, we had the same effect. The dhows were disabled, pirates were either killed or captured, the crews were liberated, and both dhows sailed off back to, in our case, back to Iran, because it was an Iranian dhow with an Iranian crew. So we were lucky. We had several further disruptions, including the Danes, again, the wonderful Danes, running a dhow right up onto the beach. It was chasing it, it was coming back into the anchorage, and it just ran itself aground. All the pirates jumped off, and so did the crew, I think, because they knew what was going to happen. They didn't. And then it was just left on the beach, and you saw that film clip of the Danish helicopter going back the following day and taking some fairly decisive action with 50 caliber, high explosive shells very accurately, making sure it wouldn't go to sea again. And it's still there, if you fancy going to visit it. So, this is a film clip, this is on YouTube, and it just shows very succinctly, broadly, what it was. It's in Dutch. I'll try and explain broadly. It just says, Gulf of Aden, that's inaccurate, but the 2nd of April, a dhow trying to leave, 16 pirates captured, 2 killed, and 16 crew liberated. This is the boarding party going out as a pair. I don't know why that ship is in there, it had nothing to do with it. NATO flag, of course. It's one of the the snipers who was talking. So he was sitting on the upper deck of the Tron, observing what was going on, waiting just a couple of fire, not expecting it to happen. The boarding team got close. You've seen this clip before. It was invited on board by the crew to go on board, and all of a sudden the crew opened, the pirates opened fire. Our boats withdrew, and then very accurate sniper fire went in. Obviously from the helmet camera.
Het boordenteam ging eruit, richting de bel. De mannen zijn dichterbij, kwamen werd erop gevuurd door de piraten. Maar de sniping zaten dit. En we reageerden op hun door middel van...
He's explaining the story that he, another sniper, was reacting to the fire that was being laid down on our boarding team. Right, those are our snipers firing, and the ones that are hitting here would have killed the two pirates. There were 6 injured as well, which we patched up on board. It's the captain of the ship, René Tass, who's really describing the same thing. But what he's going on to describe as well is the fact that in a most unusual action, one of the pirates merchant ships that had been captured actually weighed anchor under the direction of the pirates and drove itself straight towards the action that we were taking. So what we wanted to do, whether they wanted to ram us or whatever, but our action there was fairly decisive, and that was to fire several rounds of high explosive 5-inch shells into the sea fairly close by. And you can see how close some of the shots are going. Several pirates tried to escape. I think they were trying to take some of their injured people ashore. The dhow itself appeared to be dead in the water, so we took the main threat, which was the escaping skiff. We stopped that, arrested all the crew, and then, arrested all the pirates that were on board, and then sent our own boarding team on board here to liberate and set the dhow free. Here we are, all getting up. Nine of the pirates are currently in the Netherlands awaiting execution. 2, as I say, were killed, several were patched up, and 6 were sent back ashore. How old do you think the youngest of them was? 8, not bad, 11. And he'd been captured 3 times before already. So you can see the kind of thing that we're dealing with. Some of them are older, but there's a lot of young people out there trying their luck. Right, so how can the ships defend themselves? I've mentioned best management practices. You can see here the razor wire, which actually is, pirates are quite good at pulling that off, unfortunately, so merchant ships are getting better. You can deafen them with something called a long-range acoustic device. You can have armed security personnel, or even dummies. You can stuff a whole load of paper and straw into into some oilskins, in order to speak, and stick a man on the deck. And it apparently is quite effective. But the most important thing is to have, as I said, and I'm going on about it admirably, is to have a safe room down at the bottom of the ship from where you can navigate, steer, communicate, feed, drink, and keep your crew for up to 5 or so days. Because within 5 days there will be a naval ship with you. Sounds a long time, 5 days, but as I said, something happens in Madrid and you're in Oslo, it takes a while to get there. I won't rattle on too much about the Citadel. I think I've done that one to death, but it guarantees as much as possible that the crew cannot be captured. And this is the best example of the Citadel that we found. This is the 27th of January this year, and if you remember, one of the names I asked you to remember right from the beginning, this is the New York Star. The crew was all Indonesian, apart from the officers. This chap here is Croatian, and all his officers were either Croatian or Ukrainian, and they had an unarmed guard team with them. And you say, well, what use is an unarmed guard team? Well, actually what they did was they kept extra lookouts, they did lots of drills so that if the ship was attacked, the crew would know what to do. They checked all the physical barriers that were there to make sure that that the pirates couldn't get in, and it was a very orderly retreat down into the safe room. The ship was overflown after about 6 hours by a maritime patrol aircraft, and after that the pirates knew the game was up, and so they left. So we were able to come on board, do a security sweep, and just inspect some of the damage. Actually, it was fine. It was on its way to Colombo, Sri Lanka, as its next port of call, and it was absolutely fine. You can see the kind of damage. That was a rocket-propelled grenade, very well aimed by a pirate, that made a real mess of the cabin inside. There you can see kind of how the doors were welded shut, steel doors that were pretty impregnable, and there were about 8 layers of these doors, so the pirates could not get through. So it was a really good example of a citadel working. I've nearly finished. I mentioned political, so we've seen the practical response, the political response, so the softer response, the higher level response, if you like, which has sort of several facets to it. We need to coordinate between the big 3 forces, NATO, EU and the coalition forces. We need to coordinate with the independent deployers. I'll show you a slide of that in a minute. National authorities. So what's Yemen doing? What's Oman doing? What's India doing? I could give you a whole lecture about India's counter-piracy measures, which are, shall we say, pretty robust and a bit more robust than ours. They don't seem to mind how many crew they kill, but don't quote me. They're getting better. Puntland is one of the states of Somalia. Puntland was one that was a British colony, along with Somaliland, and it's slightly better governed, a bit more keen to help us. And there was a lot of engagement with some of the authorities in Puntland, who were very keen to give us intelligence information and let us know what was going on. We spent time building capacity, training, improving the methods of surrounding nations such as Kenya and the Seychelles, Djibouti. And then we spent time as well visiting merchant ships, dhows, fishing dhows, just to pass on information about what we were doing and trying to suck a bit more intelligence in from what they were doing. Right, I'm really nearly over. Stick with it. I mentioned coordination. You can see these are all the ships that we had patrolling the transit corridor in the Gulf of Aden. I mentioned the independent deployers, Japanese I hadn't told you about, they're there, Indians, Chinese, all running convoys back and forward here. Got HMS Richmond down there doing the intelligence gathering, and my first flagship, De Ruyter, just buzzing into Djibouti for a bit of replenishment. Djibouti's great though. Anybody been to Djibouti before? It's truly splendid. If you love the smell of camel shit, it's the place for you. But don't go to, well, there's one restaurant we went to, which it was French, but it was true. I mentioned independent deployers. We have the Russians that were there, who, when they weren't doing convoy duty, were being very helpful to us. Actually, they helped with the New York Star. Chinese, and whenever we could, we visited these, and we would take a presentation on board to say what we were doing. Chinese and the Russians and the Indians would respond with a presentation of what they were doing. The key point was that even though they have greatly different tactical ways of operating, it was just a great way of improving confidence in each other and understanding. And that's what it's all about when it comes to international relations. The Admiral Vinogradov, by the way, I spent a night on board there in 1994 in the Persian Gulf, in a most extraordinary evening. The Russians, they spend years and years and years on board their ships, about 500 crew, 30 officers, and they built a swimming pool. They built a swimming pool just there. And a shower and a sauna complex. So having had our supper, which was truly ghastly, we had a tour of the ship, then we spent from 10 till midnight in the swimming pool, shower and sauna complex, and then being whipped down with a jolly nice branch of eucalyptus. and then 5 hours drinking vodka in a political officer's cabin. It was extraordinary. We spent a couple of visits into Seychelles for purely professional purposes, I assure you. But as you can see, we spent a while training the Seychelles Marines and the Seychelles Coast Guard in just basic counter-piracy procedures as we saw. Again, this is a great way of improving understanding. As is this, normal Yemeni Dhow, Yemeni fishermen. This is our human intelligence guy here, who done some great courses, some of them in the UK, and just knowing the right questions to ask to suck in intelligence with his interpreter here. This is a Dutch girl of Somali origin who was very much part of the team. And that was just a great way of passing on, telling the fishermen what we were doing, but also sucking whatever information you could from there. And that's pretty much it. Naval forces do get a lot of criticism. I'm not being defensive about them, but I hope you understand a bit more clearly what the restrictions are. What's interesting about that, about the future, and it's worth including in your study, world trade with the emergence of the BRIC economies, Brazil, Russia, India, China, is set, they think, to increase by about 30% in the next, well, I would say, 30, 40, 50 years. Correct me if I'm wrong with these figures. You're aware of defence cuts, naval forces, serious naval forces, the US, France, the United Kingdom. The ones who are serious about doing constabulary duty are all decreasing. So you've got this massive gap, haven't you, that's going to emerge over the next few years, and somehow we need to fill that to ensure that our trade still continues. And when you're sitting next to George Osborne or David Cameron or William Hague or anybody in authority, and you will, and don't underestimate what I'm saying to you, you will sit next to them and say, right, Prime Minister, Chancellor of the Exchequer, we want more money for our naval forces. I would say that, wouldn't I? But it's true. The pirates' tactics are changing. And I would say they're not one step ahead of us, but they're probably half a step ahead. And they probably won't do the kind of things that they were doing in the early part of this year because too many of them were getting killed. But they'll change. They'll perhaps adopt swarm attack. Lots of small boats attacking one merchant ship. Or they'll just grab a dhow and just go straight out into the Somali Basin without refueling and just try and get lucky in a short time. We have to adapt, we have to try and keep up. Industry has to play its part and do its best under different practices, but above all, we just need to be well coordinated and have a proper, comprehensive approach at all levels. That's it.
Well, first of all, a big thank you to Martin. That was a truly splendid talk. We do have some wine and some cupcakes. Glasses we weren't quite so successful in, so we'll be drinking out of paper, but it's what's inside that counts. So by all means, come up, have a few. You can then turn to your seats and we'll have a Q&A session.
The pirates in the area constantly adapting their methods to the initiatives that the different forces are doing. Are you seeing with the new influence of human intelligence and actually going out and educating the fishermen in the area, since many of the pirates are actually coming from that profession? Has that become kind of like a, I don't know, if they're starting to adapt to those sort of methods, hearing what the human initiatives are telling these fishermen, or?
So do you, so
I guess like kind of like a counter policy on the pirates' part to actually adapt to the methods that you're telling these fishermen to adapt to.
well, yes, I mean that's possible, and what we're seeing, and I think you're saying if we go and talk to them about what we're doing, will they pass that intelligence on to the pirates or even adopt it themselves? It's a very good point, and what we've seen, what we started to see was Yemeni fishermen sailing out of the South Yemeni coast or up north of the Bab el Mandeb in the southern Red Sea, sailing out and being captured, shall we say, by pirates, and then being coerced to do piracy. So I think we certainly run the danger, if we're not careful, of educating future pirates or future pirate collaborators. But you have to kind of, it's a hearts and minds thing. You have to try and win them over. As we do in sort of Western fashion. Let's try the soft approach first. But if it doesn't work, then we'll go in hard. Yeah, it's a worry. Yeah.
Leading on from that is the discussion with pirates once you capture them.
Yeah, absolutely. And the first level is the human intelligence guy who just tries to establish who are the bad guys and who are the good guys. Well, that's generally fairly straightforward. The bad guys generally look Somali. The good guys either look Indian, Indonesian, Filipino. But then if I just sort of say what happened on board HMLS Tromp after the action that you saw in the second video clip, we took them to the Seychelles. That had to go on export call anyway. As soon as we arrived in the Seychelles, an army, it would appear, about 15 military police, the marechaussee from the Netherlands, came out and spent about 4 days interrogating each one of these captives. Hence, they were able to decide who were the really, really bad guys and who were the not so bad guys that they could send back to the shore and the ones that they had captured. So there's a lot of intelligence gathering through very clever debriefing. I use the word interrogation. I mean that. I don't mean waterboarding. I don't mean I just mean normal ways of. We looked after these guys very well. Okay, they were handcuffed on their backs to the flight deck, but they were inside the hangar. But they were given food, water, everything they needed. Probably better. We didn't give them cat. We didn't give them many leaves to chew. But apart from that, they were well looked after. And then you could decide which were the ones that needed to be prosecuted. And of course, we also gained a huge amount of intelligence. Because actually, once they're captured, what we find is that they were quite, they were quite pleased to speak. And actually, it was fairly easy to bowl out the bullshitters, those who were making up stories, because they would be counted by the nets now, because they couldn't communicate with each other. Yeah.
I was just wondering what possible sort of legal complications are once you actually do capture the pirates. I mean, do you have to let a lot of them go, or do they actually get prosecuted after they're captured in their cases?
Right. Well, I don't know the full detail of human rights law, but it is the Dutch, of course, as you can imagine, with the International Court of International Criminal Court based in The Hague. You can imagine that the Dutch are very, very clean when it comes to picking the right people to take for further prosecution. And through this method of, as I say, finding out who were the bad guys, who were the good guys, then it was fairly straightforward to work out who were the ones that needed to be taken back to the Netherlands. And they're as well as piracy, they're going back. They're on charge now for attempted murder. So it's quite serious, the charges that are going to be put to them. I don't know how it's going. They were flown back around the middle of April, and I'm afraid I'm not up with what's going. But that's an interesting one to watch. The Danes are the same. I think they've flown people back. And I think most recently, I don't know if you followed the action that happened a couple of weeks ago. A yacht was pirated just sailing out of the south of in Yemeni territorial waters. And in a good piece of coordinated action between the Spanish and the French, it was a French yacht which pirated. The pirates were captured. Now they're all in France now on murder charge because they killed the skipper of the yacht and they captured his wife.
But if
I
can just add to this, out of my research I did some time ago, last year apparently there was, out of 700 captured pirates, 500 of them have to be released. So there is this legal issue, and I was just wondering whether you have any thoughts on, what is the current understanding within sort of maybe do you get any I don't know, any ideas that the legal system may be moving towards further supporting you guys, because out of 700, 500 had to be released. And
Yeah, I mean,
just last
it's
year.
a problem, and you know, like us in a what we like to call the civilized world, get very frustrated. And these are hardened, nasty criminals, but we're having to let them go. And the reason is we cannot get true international cooperation over it. It's just a bit too difficult at the moment. The United Nations is trying to bring it all together, and what is being worked on at the moment is trying to develop a court in somewhere like the Seychelles, so still within the region, which once these guys are prosecuted will send them up to a prison which is being built in Somaliland, so not far from the border with Djibouti. And that could be, well, it won't be designated international territory, it will be within Somalia, but they will be imprisoned on their own territory. Because at the moment, you don't have an international agreement on it. If a pirate is taken on board a Dutch ship, it becomes a national issue. He has to go back to the Netherlands. Danish ship has to go back to Denmark. Brit has to come back to Britain. But what you have there, I'm sorry, it's a bit of a long-winded answer, I don't mean it to be, but you have also differences between nations. The Danes are quite keen to prosecute, the Dutch are quite keen to prosecute, the French appear to be, Brits are not. It's just it's something, it's going to take an awful lot, I think, perhaps shooting a British vessel at British sailors before we start heavily prosecuting. So you have a lot of inconsistencies in the national responses, and no yet, but we're working towards it, international response. It's being led by the UNODC, the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime. Is that sorry, is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll come back to that. Yeah.
Linked into that a little bit, you spoke quite convincingly about how the naval forces actually in the area are doing a good job with what's available to them. How much do you think that the scarcity of NATO resources in the area is down to the fact that the overwhelming majority of hostages are from Indonesia, the Philippines? They're not British, they're not American.
Brilliant, absolutely right. I mean, if I'm allowed to use the word white Caucasian around here, if you saw the 698 hostages held, if there were 698 white Caucasians held, then you can imagine that the international response would be far more robust. The fact is that there are Indians, Indonesians, Filipinos, and I'm afraid to say, please don't quote me, but I mean, how can I put this? But they don't attract enough attention. I mean, there are something like 22 different nationalities of people being held, and most of them are either, from Eastern nations. And it just doesn't grab those who could take more action. The other issue, of course, with NATO, bearing in mind that NATO is just but one of the big three, NATO has really bigger fish to fry. NATO's number one priority is Afghanistan. End of story. There's nothing more important than that. That has to be a success. It has to be seen to succeed. Next one down, not far off, is Libya. That has, again, to succeed, and it appears that it is. Way down there is this minor irritation called piracy. And again, this is not me criticising NATO. I'm not clever enough to do that. And nor would I, because I think NATO is a brilliant organisation. It just, when it comes to handing out resources, it's not going to be up there with the others. We'll come back to you. Yeah.
How far would you say there can or will be a military solution to piracy problem rather than like a socio-economic one to Somalia, say?
Well, I think the military solution is doing our best to keep the lid on it. I mean, we all know, it's a hackneyed phrase, the solution lies not on the sea, it lies on the land. You have this vast ungoverned space called Somalia, which, until we sort that out, until we help to encourage proper rule of law, proper security systems, so that people can go about their daily lives and work and live legitimately, then you're not going to sort out piracy. That's the way. I mean, the military, with the resources that it has, which are many, just does its best to keep the lid on it. And there are spikes in activity, which we saw that can completely put the lid on it, but they'll be back. But until you sort out the problems within Somalia itself, then you will not sort out piracy. And the great thing for pirates is that actually once they've sorted out Somalia, which I can't see happening in the next, for another 10 years at least, there are some brilliant piracy grounds around the world. If you look at what's going on in the Gulf of Guinea, off Benin, off Togo, those sort of around in Nigeria itself, there's a different kind of piracy happening there, and all the oil infrastructure is it's spreading, and it's becoming a very good model off the coast of Brazil. I'm sure it will spread to there. It's a brilliant way of making money. Somalia is the best because there's no proper police. I'm going to go there now.
At the end of your talk, you mentioned adapting for the future. How should fleets themselves, in terms of their composition, be adapted? Should they be looking for larger numbers of smaller vessels, for instance, to deal with problems like this and to spread themselves across such vast areas?
Yeah. Again, a very good question. And we wrestle with this within the naval staff constantly. Do we need these massive destroyers and frigates? We're down to 19 now in the Royal Navy. Or could we just cut our losses and have lots and lots of fast patrol boats? But actually, those, they wouldn't have the endurance of destroyers and frigates. And the backbone of a navy is always, as we call them, DDFF, destroyers and frigates. Yes, ideally, for this particular period of time, probably some fast patrol boats to ply up and down the coast and really see off the pirate safe havens. But when that problem is gone, perhaps not for the next few years, and you've sacrificed your larger all-round frigates and destroyers for patrol boats, you'll never get your frigates and destroyers back. So when a Libya happens again, or a Falklands happens again, or a Gulf War happens again. So the answer to your question is yes, fast patrol boats would be very good, providing they have the right endurance, but in the longer term, I'm afraid, for the longer term view, for the survival of the serious navies, destroyers and frigates are the answers. And air power, by the way. So when you're also sitting next to David Cameron, Dr. Lynn Fox, or these are the sort of people we need to invite to come and speak to you here. Just tell them that air power from the sea is also the serious way ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, during your speech you mentioned that it was a very heavily international operation. At the same time, just now you were talking about international inconsistency when it comes to policy. I was just wondering, on an immediate level, how did you overcome the language barriers when you were dealing with staff situations?
With my wonderful Georgian, my wonderful Bulgarian, it's all done in English, fortunately. English is the universal, the common language. But what we do have, and actually my wonderful Georgie joined with very little English at the beginning of December last year, but by the end was tremendous. But you had to, subtly beat out of him still the Cold War mentality. I cannot do this because I have not been told from the higher authority. Well, no, George, you can think independently now. So actually, language was okay to get over. It's the culture that we need to sort of break down. It's a constant battle. But NATO, as I'm sure you're aware, it is a military organisation, but above all, it's a political organisation. It's like the United Nations. It's all about being inclusive and keeping people together. And the bottom line is so that Europeans don't beat the shit out of each other again in another world war. That's why NATO exists. Yes.
Was it ever incredibly frustrating working with people like Georgie from Bulgaria who may not have the same policy ideas as you?
No, but because he would get angry with me about what I was trying to get him to do, but eventually, he could see that getting an inclusive planning system together was probably the way ahead. I mean, he was one of the architects of Operation Ketting which was the focused operation that we used off the coast. He and Louis, my Dutch intelligence guy, the three of us really, sat down and worked it out. Have you heard of the estimate process? No. It's fabulous. You use it for going shopping, for going on holiday, for doing your thesis. It's a 7-question system. What have I been told to do? What are the enemy forces doing? What friendly forces have I got? What's our overall plan? What logistics do I need to back it up? What are my control mechanisms? And what's my exit strategy? You could shopping. How much money don't I have? What has my wife told me to go and buy? It's called the estimate process, and you will come across it. And those who are thinking of joining the armed forces, particularly the Navy, and I've got to put in a plug, of course, for the Royal Navy now, it's still an absolutely splendid career. I've had over 30 years, and I've loved every minute of it. And the adventure will not go away. I got distracted. It's a culture thing. NATO, the Royal Navy, the British Army, generally, most people use the estimate process. It's just a fantastic decision-making tool. It's relatively simple. You can make it as complicated as you like. But once people see the value of that as a planning tool for military operations, then it's kind of it's the language of cooperation. Once you fix it. I digressed. Did I answer your question? Did I answer your question? Sorry about that. Yes.
It seems to me that quite a lot of effort and money is spent on making everything a bit more technologically advanced, a bit better, making one ship do everything. How useful is that in situations like these? Like how much of an advantage is that technological advantage over the pirates? However, you mentioned intelligence, but in other ways, does that give you a massive advantage, having better weapons technology, better...
Well, in a way, yes, but of course, how do you... Sorry, I just spilled a bit of wine there, because I blame the paper cup, not the amount I've managed to drink. Of course, having a light AK-47 or a rocket-propelled grenade is all a pirate needs to do the job that he wants to do, plus a ladder, plus a Yamaha outboard motor, a bit of food and a bit of cap, and you could say that what we have is too much. A massive 5-inch gun, some 50 caliber machine guns, some sniper rifles, Vulcan Phalanx, a wonderful Vulcan Phalanx. Thank you, America. That we use. But what we did find was that the two things pirates do not like is surprise and overwhelming force. And if you rolled over the horizon with those two things, generally they would put their hands in the air and just surrender. And of course it's far better that they do that than try and put up a fight, because they will lose a fight, because we do have this overwhelming force. We go back to the other question, whether patrol boats would be better than big all-round frigates and destroyers. Probably yes for the moment, as long as they had the well-trained sharpshooters. But who knows? Will the pirates now start getting airborne weapons? Will they start trying to shoot down helicopters using RPG or a man-PAD, a man-portable air defense system? We have to be ready for it. Sorry, another roundabout answer. There's another one at the back. I think, yes?
Yeah, you didn't really go into much detail with this, but I was wondering what the nature of NATO's relationship with the transitional government in Somalia was like, and whether this helped or hindered your operations.
Another really good question. On the tactical level, at our level, it was good, and we were swapping emails constantly with, more with the Puntland authorities than anybody else. The transitional federal government we did not touch, because that was a national. That would have been way over our heads. We had us at the tactical level. The operational level was our operational headquarters at Northwood, headed up by the British Commander-in-Chief, Sir Trevor Saw. But beyond that, dealing at the political level is the what do you call it? The Council of Europe. I think is it the NATO, the political level. So they are the ones who would be dealing with the transitional federal government. At our level, no dealings at all. But yes, and I think regularly the leader of the transitional federal government would either be invited to Brussels to speak with the North Atlantic Council, or there would be representatives that would go and speak to them. But the major support for the TFG is on a bilateral, so UK directly, US directly, other countries directly, or through the United Nations. And you can see the number of UN organisations that are involved in supporting the TFG. I'm going to go random now. Who hasn't? Yes, go on.
Is the majority of the piracy organized by bar syndicates, or would you say it's just like a hodgepodge of malcontents?
I think it's in some ways it started off as a cottage industry, but I think it's getting more sophisticated. And I mentioned the transfer of outboard motors, of ladders, of skiffs, of fuel, etc. And I think, I don't know where they are, I could speculate that the Mr. Bigs are in Nairobi, Djibouti, Dar es Salaam, Addis Ababa, or even London. And I would think that indirectly at least, there's a lot of backing from some people who really see this as a very good way of generating cash. But there's no doubt about it, like the mafia has a superb support organisation. Somali pirates are decades behind, but they're catching up. It's getting bigger. Yes, go on.
Sure. So, from what I've read, this is maybe a couple of years ago, a lot of the reason that pirates have become pirates is because of illegal fishing off the coast.
Yeah.
And also read that some of that illegal fishing is now being protected by some of the international ships that have come in to provide protection to other ships also.
Yeah.
Is that still true, or was that true? And if it is, which countries are the ones who are sponsoring illegal fishing?
Yeah, and I couldn't really, possibly say